Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Literary Projects information session. I'm Rudra Priya, and I manage the literary arts and the music operating programs here at the Toronto Arts Council. I want to thank you for joining us today and learning about this program. I want to start by acknowledging that the Toronto Arts Council is located on the traditional lands of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations. We are grateful for their stewardship of this land and recognize that their stories are integral to this place. As a settler, I am grateful for the privilege to live, work, and make art here. So I want to ensure you have the access information that is important for you to know about this session. Closed captions are available, and we'll be sending these slides to everyone that is registered after the session has ended. A captioned recording will also be made available to you, and you can request a transcript as well if you'd like. ASL interpretation is also available. The interpreters are spotlighted. If you don't see them, you can adjust your Zoom view to gallery view or follow host view. And if you have any issues with this or you have another access request, please just message us in the chat. And if you have questions about this presentation or the Literary Projects program while I'm speaking, you can drop it into the Q&A box and we'll get to it at the end of today's session. So TAC is a public funding body for the arts. This means that we operate as a nonprofit entity that engages with artists, organizations, and collectives to support the arts in the city and to fund your projects and performances and artworks. And our job is to make connections with artists and between artists, and hopefully to make being an artist in the city more possible and more sustainable. My work here is about facilitating your access to these grants. I'm here to provide information that will hopefully be helpful to you and also to answer your questions and make sure you have all the information that you need to submit a grant application. So today I'm going to spend about 25 minutes going through what the Literary Projects program funds and giving you an overview of the application itself. I'm going to discuss the changes that we've made to this grant's eligibility. And I'm also going to walk you through some of the application itself so that you understand what you need to prepare to apply. Finally, I will spend a few minutes talking about some grant writing tips, and then we should have some time to answer your questions about eligibility or about any aspects of the application process. As I'm speaking, feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A, and like I said, we will get to them at the end. So who is eligible to apply for the Literary Projects Grant? This program is not open to individuals, then it's not for funding individual book projects or writing projects. That's the Writers Program. Literary Projects is only open to nonprofit organizations and to artist collectives operating on a nonprofit basis. So if you're already part of an organization or a collective or unincorporated magazine that's based within the city of Toronto, and your mandate is to serve the literary community, writers, authors, performers, and audiences, you are likely eligible to apply. Note that your project has to take place within the city of Toronto. And when we say that you must be a professional literary organization, what we mean is that your leadership is made up of professional artists. That means they've maybe had some training in the literary arts, they're practicing artists, and they are recognized by other artists in their field. So what does this grant actually fund? It's a project grant. which means that you have to apply with a start date and an end date for your project, which needs to be time limited. If you're applying for this upcoming March 16th deadline, the start date for your project needs to be after June 1st, 2026, with an end date that is earlier than May 31st, 2028. So you have up to 2 years to complete the project with this funding. What can you do with the grant? So your project can be a performance series, it can be a workshop, a festival, a conference, or another event that serves literary artists and audiences, or it can be an issue of a magazine. You are required to pay literary artists as part of your project, and you can also budget for most other costs associated with carrying out the project as well. So things like production, design, marketing, administration, equipment rentals, venue costs, maybe printing or distribution if you're a magazine, or cover design, photography. Works for digital platforms are eligible. So if you're doing a series of events on Zoom, that's fine. And if you're publishing a series of works only digitally, that's eligible in the publishing category too. If you wanted to do something from both categories and make a sort of hybrid event where you're partially asking to fund an event or a professional development activity, and you're partially asking to fund a publishing activity, that's eligible too. You just need to explain it in the project description and break down your costs in the budget. TAC will not fund 100% of any project. That means that you need at least one other revenue source that is helping you to fund your project. It can be a source like ticket sales or donations, another grant, a sponsorship, or it can be an in-kind donation. That means volunteer hours, services, a donated venue. Those can all count as a source of revenue. You would need to put the dollar amount of the in-kind donation into your budget as a revenue source. Excuse me. One thing that is not eligible is travel expenses. So you can invite a performer or an artist from outside of Toronto to be a part of this project, and you can pay them an artist fee with this grant, but you can't use the grant to pay for their travel to Toronto or their hotel in Toronto, for example. In terms of what we've actually changed about this grant, we've made magazine publishing eligible as long as the magazine is either incorporated as a nonprofit entity or is an unincorporated collective of artists with a bank account in that collective's name. So as long as you're arts focused and you're not incorporated as a for-profit publisher or organization, you can apply. We've also changed the fact that arts criticism magazines can apply. So you don't have to be a magazine only focused on publishing original works of fiction, poetry, and nonfiction, although we welcome that as well. You can be a magazine focused on music writing or visual arts writing or dance criticism. You just have to make sure that your magazine is made up of a majority of writing by Canadians. So that means more than 50%. And lastly, we've also made other publishing costs eligible to be covered by this grant. So things like paying your editors, your curators, your designers, paying for ads and marketing and distribution and printing, that's all eligible now. I'm going to take another few minutes to go into some detail here about our application process. And then I'm going to tell you a bit about how your application is assessed here at TAC and give you some tips for making sure that you're submitting a strong application. So here's what it looks like when you go to the application portal. The website is tac.smartsimple.ca, and it's also linked on the slide here. If you already know that you have an account, you can sign in. You need to make sure that you have an organization or collective account, though. If you've only applied for individual grants at TAC before, you'll need to create that new organization or collective account in your organization's name before you can see the application for this program. So once you log in, you'll see a list of applications that you can open. You will also see, once you open the application, that it has three main sections. So it has a project description, it has the budget, and it has a support material section. Here's a couple of screenshots from the application itself. I highly recommend you open an application well before the deadline, so that you can have a look at the questions and make sure that you have time to prepare your answers. So as you can see on the left, we have fillable fields and an empty budget table on the right. They're both pretty straightforward to fill out. You can use Google Docs to copy over your questions and formulate your answers before entering them in the application itself. You're going to see that we ask for a venue for the dates of your project and for a list of the contributors and the artists that you're working with. Make sure you do some planning and have that information ready. You'll need to have some, if not all, of your confirmed artists and their bios ready to submit with this application. You need to have a venue if you're doing an event. And if those things change, like you end up working with additional artists or you change your venue, that's okay. You can report your changes later in your final report. But you need to show that you're applying for something that's already planned out. So that's why we ask for that information. You'll also have a chance in this project description section to talk about the details of your project and why it's important. You can discuss your past history or past events here a little bit if they're relevant, but make sure you're focusing on answering each question fully and directly with regards to the project that you're actually requesting funding for. You're going to see in the budget that we ask you to fill out all your revenue sources and your expenses. You want to make sure these are realistic. Research what your costs are actually going to be, and then make sure you fill out the supplementary budget information as well. So you communicate how much you're planning to pay each artist, what the value of your donated goods and services are, if you have any of those. And there's also a contingency plan requested in this section. It asks what you will do if you don't receive the full amount that you've requested. This is an opportunity to show the assessment panel that you've planned your budget in a way that you can pivot or adjust to ensure the project still happens. So make sure you understand what the recommended artist payments are in your field of work and for the type of presentation or activity that you're doing. You can look at CARFAC guidelines, which are linked on our program page in the program guidelines. And you can also look at what the Writers Union of Canada recommends. The support material is the third main section of your application. It's optional to submit this, but I recommend that you do because it's another place where you can show how capable and ready your organization or collective is to embark on this project. If your project is an event, you can upload support material like posters that you use to advertise your previous events, photos from your previous events, or testimonials. If your project is a publishing project, you can upload up to 6 pages of previously published material to show the kind of work that you want to showcase. We ask that your support material is relevant to the project that you're applying for. And we ask that you make sure it's in the right format. So, we don't accept certain types of links and we have file size limits and PDF page limits. So be sure to pay attention to that and follow all those guidelines. Once you've submitted your grant application, we'll begin the assessment process. So how are TAC grant applications assessed? Well, like many arts councils, we actually work with other artists to assess your grants, and we rely on their knowledge and expertise in the field to do that. So as your program manager, I would put together a panel of folks who have worked in the literary community, organizing events, workshops, festivals, and publishing magazines to assess a batch of applications. They will then read everything and have a meeting to discuss it. And then they'll make their recommendations for funding based on the artistic merit of the projects that they've looked at. They also look at financial viability and the impact that they think the project will have on the literary field. They also have to work within our limited budgets. So they provide feedback on the applications, which we're also able to sometimes share with you after the results are announced. So if you would find that helpful, you can always reach out and request that feedback. One important thing to note is that panels change and they're different every time we hold an assessment. And we're always looking for folks to serve on panels. So if you are interested in that, feel free to contact me. Program managers do not assess your applications. We only ensure that your project is eligible. If something is missing from your application, you might receive a revisions request in your inbox. And what that allows you to do is go back into your application and make the change that's being requested. Applications in this program have a maximum request of $8,000. If your project is successful, you may not receive the full amount that you've asked for. You might receive some or most of that amount because the panels are working within a tight budget and we can't always fulfill the full request. But we can't give you more than your request, but we can give you less. So keep that in mind when you're budgeting and make sure that you're asking for a realistic amount to complete your project. Those panel recommendations are then approved by our director and CEO before they're announced. And once you get your grant and do your project, you will submit a final report. That report is very important to us. It's due 3 months after the project end date that you list in your application. And you can use it to report any changes to your proposed project and also to submit the actuals budget so we can see what you spent the grant funds on. You must submit the final report before you can apply for any other TAC grants. If you do apply and you're not successful, you can actually use that same project and the writing that you did about it to apply for the next deadline, which is in early August. Every assessment panel is different and every batch of applications is different. So there is always a chance in that comparative process that you will be successful the next time around. So keep that in mind. The next thing I want to go over is the fact that TAC offers 2 different forms of accessibility support. The first is for your actual application. So if you identify as deaf or have a disability and you require some support to submit your actual application, we'll cover the cost of that support up to $500 per year. You can work with a service provider and they can invoice us directly for the time that they spend supporting you. This process requires that you give your program manager a heads up, at least a couple of weeks in advance. And also that you ensure that you sort of communicate with us and send along your service provider's name and contact information so we can set up this support for you. The second form of accessibility support that we offer is an additional grant called the Accessibility Grant, and this is to complete your project. So let's say you're planning to work with a deaf or disabled artist in the course of your actual project. They require some accommodations to participate, and we will require the cost of those accommodations and supports up to $5,000 per project. You actually need to fill out a separate application in our portal and fill out the costs that relate to those accommodations. So you don't need to disclose anything about the artist's disability or anything like that, just the accommodations and their costs. All of these requests, if they're eligible, will be approved as long as your project is actually funded by TAC. So you can apply for the accessibility grant at the same time as your project grant, or you can wait until you receive the results of your project grant and apply after that. And you can even apply in the middle of your project. So let's say you decide to add an artist, partway through your project and they require accommodations. You can actually go back into our portal and submit this accessibility grant at that time. And it's a shorter turnaround, so I think it takes around 4 weeks to process. Okay, now we'll get on to some tips that make for a strong application. So first, you want to read the guidelines carefully. They're available on our website. You want to make sure you're eligible, make sure that your project makes sense for this program's deadlines and its objectives, and maybe do some research on similar events that are happening in the city. Also want to contact your program manager. Have some questions prepared. If you read the guidelines and you're confused about anything, have that kind of noted and ready to go. You can sort of discuss your project or summarize it in an email, and you can get some feedback, even if it's just to confirm that your project is eligible. You want to give yourself adequate time. So it takes time to gather project contributors' bios and to prepare and upload support materials. You want to make sure that you also have consent to submit the project contributors' names and bios and support materials as part of your application. So make sure that you're giving yourself enough time to do all of that. Another great thing to do is to have someone review your application. So, ask a friend or a colleague or a fellow artist to just read through your application and see if they can understand your goals and, the details of your project by reading that application. And that's a strong indicator that anyone on the panel that reads your application will also really understand what you're trying to do. Follow the instructions in the application. Make sure you complete all the fields and triple check your grant. You want to make sure that your goals are realistic and specific and relevant to the program. And, just make sure that you've really read through and then given yourself a break maybe and come back to the application and read it with fresh eyes to make sure everything makes sense and you're answering each question. And finally, you can also have your application reviewed by a program manager. So if the application deadline is, more than, I'd say, like 2 or 3 weeks out, we might have time to actually make sure that your draft application covers everything. So if you want, you can write everything out and then make that request via email, and we'll go into the portal and read through your draft and just make sure that everything is good to go. This brings us to the end of the presentation portion of this info session. So now we will get to your questions. And I just want to let you know that if I'm not able to cover your question in the Q&A today, send me an email. It's up on the screen, and I will make sure that I get to it.